Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special bonus episode with David Pereira on developing product owner skills in your company. David is a passionate product leader who loves leading teams in building solutions that challenges the status quo, and he's currently the head of product management at Virtual Identity in Munich. David, it's a pleasure to have you again here on the podcast, so welcome back.
Thank you for the chance, Vasco. I love being here.
There's a link on the show notes for those of you who want to listen to the previous David Pereira's podcast where we dove into product owner and the patterns at that time. So, David, in your position, one of the key aspects you need to consider is how to develop the product manager, which I guess is what you guys call it. Also, for our Scrum Master listeners, product owners do a lot of the work that also product managers do. So your job is to develop the product managers and, for in our case, product owner skills. So today we're going to dive deep into that topic. What is your personal checklist when it comes to the key skills a product manager or a product owner should have?
Yeah, on our side, we call it product manager, but in the end of the day, is a position responsible for the outcome. And we know it's the same as many product owners do. But I have here particular 4 skills that we should have to succeed with our challenge. And I see them as having a value-driven mindset. And this is like we are solving problems instead of delivering solutions. So that's how we should look into things, I believe so. And the other one is communication. Product managers need to have a very sharpened communication skill. And that means adapting to the scenario. For example, when you talk to customers and users, stakeholders, developers, UX, you need to adapt and know how to navigate in this very complex environment. Because the same way you talk to a developer will not work the way you talk to a customer. And connecting to this one, I see the empathy. Empathy is the ability of walking a mile in the other's shoes. And I think until we can do that, we cannot solve the other's problem. And we need to be able to empathize. The last one for me is the decision making. Sometimes we don't have data, even though we would like to have data to back up our decisions. But we need to keep progressing. And what I foster is make decisions and think what you can learn from that. Because at the end of the day, a bad decision is generally better than no decision, because no decision leads to paralysis, and bad decisions lead to learning anyway. So then we can inspect and adapt. So I keep these 4 skills as the key ones.
Yeah, and of course, the difficult question is not necessarily what are the key skills, but how do you get your product managers to acquire and develop those skills? Because, everyone that comes through the door might have maybe a bit more on one of these and a bit less on the others, but as it were, product owners and product managers, they need to be quite good on all of these 4, and I'm sure our listeners might have others in mind as well. So we need to look at the mechanics as the process that you take as the head of product management to say, okay, so where are we and how can we develop this further? So how do you work with the product owners and, of course, in your case, also with the rest of the organization to develop those skills for your product managers?
That is a very important question, and it's a very hard one. And I will be very honest. I have tried different strategies. I will share the one that works the best. I used to think that the one-on-one is the perfect room to do that. And I think it's just the first step, because the one-on-one, you can share observations with each other, what you have experienced and so on, and help them progress. And then people will go do something and come back and share stories. But then they share their perspective, and then you try to help and understand. But what I'm doing now is the following. I try to meet my people 1 step ahead of them. Not 2 steps, not 3 steps, 1 step ahead of them. And together, we define a learning goal. For example, let's say that someone struggles with decision making. They struggle making prioritization and say, I want to know how to prioritize in different scenarios. And then they want to master prioritization. It's not the whole decision making. And then say, okay, then I will help you on that. and I will take part in some of your rituals, and I will be an observer. So we define the learning goal, and I go and collect observations when they are really acting as a product manager. And by doing that, I can have a concrete discussion with a direct feedback, not an abstract discussion. Because the secret for me is moving away from abstraction and going to something that is concrete and provide feedback based on observation. That has helped people progress in my scenario.
So the acquisition of skills is a challenge in itself, but what you're sharing here with us is also how do we walk with them through that acquisition process, right? Like you were talking about defining a clear goal, shadowing them in some ceremonies or meetings or discussions, and collecting observations, and then having a discussion based on those concrete observations. This also reminds me that very often we tend to think that training is a good solution, right? We just train people. And although training needs to be part of the mix, for sure, when you said that you've discovered that having discussions based on concrete observations is the right way to cause reflection, you're also sharing, at least as I understood it, that training isn't the place where you get the skills. Training is the place where you collect information, but you still need to transform that information into skills, right?
Exactly. And I don't exclude training, but I take them as a different perspective. I think training is a source of inspiration. You gain insights, and then you need to bring them to your scenario, to your reality. And I also provide trainings with external trainers to the team. And this is a source of inspiration, motivation for them. And it's really helpful. But my team look at me and say, okay, I have learned a lot of things, and how can I apply them now? Because then it becomes like a mountain, you know? What I do is I help them remove the stone inside the shoe to take the first step, one step at a time, and moving until we get to the top of the mountain. But I have the feeling that training alone will not be enough because it's a push, but then you need to provide observations on the way, on the journey. So I think I like walking with them, and I'm not the only one doing this, because as my people have more senior, let's say, product managers, the senior product managers also have the less experienced one. They also go into the ceremonies and share observations. So I'm not alone on this journey. We help each other in the team.
Yeah. So the seniors in the team also work with the juniors in the team to go through the
Yes.
same process, right? Define learning goal, collect observations, have discussion on concrete observations. And that's also something that I'm interested to hear your opinion on. That's also something that I talk very often to Scrum Masters, that our role is to help the product owners that we work with to do a better job. Now, that may be sometimes working with the team instead of the product owner. Other times it means working with the product owner instead of the team, because of course there's a relationship there. And from my perspective, it is very important that Scrum Masters make themselves available to help the product owner from a different perspective. So not telling the product owner how to do their job because we assume they know, but rather to help the product owner understand the dynamic and collaboration with the team and of course, potentially even the stakeholders. How do you guys do it at Virtual Identity? Do you also have this kind of partnership between Scrum Master or somebody on the team and the product manager?
Yeah, this is for us a particular scenario because we are an agency, and not all of our projects we have someone dedicated for the Scrum Master role. Sometimes it's someone inside the team taking this responsibility. But in a scenario where we have a Scrum Master, what we encourage is the Scrum Master helping the product owner increase collaboration with the Scrum team. Because it's very often the case that the product owner will be focused on delivery, but then it's very easy to cross some lines and start being pushy instead of collaborating with the team. And then we miss the eye level. We miss the empathy, understanding why developers simply need more time to do something. And we are not being a listener there. We are just trying to push things. So the Scrum Master helps ensuring a sustainable environment, an environment where we are a single team, not one in a higher level than the other. And I really value that, because without this, the team atmosphere may go down.
Yeah, absolutely. And the dynamic between the team and the product owner can be an amplifier, can be something that grows the team, makes the team more effective, or it can be an obstacle, right?
Exactly. And just one point here, because I mentioned that sometimes our teams don't have a dedicated Scrum Master, but when that is the case, and we see something is not going so well, we invite an outsider to go in the team and observe and play the Scrum Master role for 1 or 2 sprints and share what is happening and help the product owner escape from that scenario and help the team become a better team, not only a group of people collaborating.
Absolutely. All right. So you've worked with PMs for a while now, product managers, that is, helping them to grow and become better at the role that they are performing. What have you learned are the biggest obstacles or challenges for product managers when they try to develop these skills?
The biggest challenge, I would say, is overwhelming them. Because if we step back and think product manager, product owner, the burden they carry is too heavy. And depending on where they are on their journey, it might make them super scary on how to progress. So the biggest obstacle is transforming something into a monster, super complex, and then you cannot progress. And what I try to do is only clarify the next step and agree on one step at a time and put effort on making that better. I brought four skills in the beginning, and I say, what is the one you want to develop? Someone tells about communication. I will help them develop communication, active listening, and so on and so on. But I will not overwhelm them with the other aspects. Let's develop first your active listening and so on. Because what I see is there is a trend of looking at the top of the mountain and say, how do we get there? It's so complex. It's so far from where I am now. And then it impedes me from taking the simple next step. That's what I need right now. So as a leader, I really need to meet my team members one step ahead of them and help them see the next step and not only be overwhelmed by the mountain ahead of them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And also something that us as Scrum Masters, we can take to heart, right? It's to help the product managers or the product owners to first decide what is it that they want to improve and then focus on that rather than try to say, hey, here's all the things that you need to learn, right? Because that will create a mental obstacle for the person to even get started.
Exactly.
And how about your perspective? Like, what do you think are the skills that most product managers out there that you've worked with need to focus on? What's the biggest gap, if you will, in the current state of practice in software teams?
And my opinion is very simple: is having a value-driven mindset, because it's often the case that we focus so much on the output. In other words, deliver more features. This is the only thing we have in our mind, that we forget what are we trying to achieve here? What problem are we solving? And I think it's so easy to go into a solution driven mindset that we forget about value. And value is something abstract, but we need to think, which progress do we help our end users make so that will generate some value for them and ultimately value for the business. And this is what I have observed in many people. They are very good at organizing and breaking down solutions and creating several epics, user stories, and so on. But when it comes to the question, what do we want to achieve with that? How do we measure success? How do we ensure what we are delivering is meaningful for our end users? Then it becomes blurry. So I think this is the challenge I have observed and I have personally faced also.
And how do you help them overcome that? Because of course that's the challenge. But next is, okay, so how do we get over it? How do we help these product managers?
I like using patient and doctor example.
What do you mean by that?
This is something like this. When, let's say, you have a stomach ache and you know the kind of medicines you have, but they are over. When you go to your doctor, and if you are the patient, do you tell the doctor, I want you to prescribe me this antibiotic? Or do you tell, I have stomach ache here? Because if you tell the doctor you want the antibiotic, the doctor will just look at you and say, Okay, but tell me what is happening with you. Because the doctor knows he is the specialist. And then he wants to understand what problem you have, what pain you have, what symptoms, what did you do, what did it lead to that. And then he will decide what is the solution for your problem. And what I say is, we as product people, let's say like that, we should be more doctors. We should be the ones helping our end users navigate on the problem. Because what happens nowadays is end users, they come also with solution. They tell you, I want an app, I want a website, I want this feature. But then you need to help them. What do you want that for? What do you want to achieve? And talk more about their lives instead of the feature they want. And then we find the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great example. I wish I had thought about that example before, because that's one of the things that I have to repeat over and over again with working with many of the teams and product owners that I work with, which is this idea that our role as product people is to figure out what the solution is. The customer's role is to figure out what the problem is. Of course, we help them, but don't mix the two, right? If we think that the customer knows what the solution is, then what are we doing? Right? It's not the customer's job to know what the solution is. It's the customer's job to know what the product is. And I really like this patient and doctor example, because it is exactly as you say. And these days it's quite obvious, because people will go on Google, find whatever, and say to the doctor, this is what I have, give me the drug. And of course,
Exactly.
a responsible doctor would never follow that. They would ask, as you said, where is this coming from? When did it start? What else did you feel? What are you eating? Did you exercise? Whatever that may be, right?
This is a big challenge for us. And what I do with my people, I say, like, are you helping your patients that tell you the symptoms, or are you just giving them whatever they want? Because if you do that, as you mentioned, a responsible doctor wouldn't, because he knows just by giving what the patient is asking, he has a chance of killing the patient.
Yeah, of course. There, the stakes are quite clear, right? So that's why people would never accept that as an approach that would be acceptable. All right. So we also talked about collaboration. We talked about how important is the collaboration between product managers and stakeholders, but also product managers and team, and how the Scrum Masters can help with that. How do you help your product managers develop that collaboration skill, specifically the collaboration with the team?
Yeah, this is something I'm very grateful for my company's culture. We have an open feedback culture. So we always provide feedback to each other. And what I encourage the product owners is to ask team for feedback. And if generally the team would just provide, but if they are not hearing anything, should ask, for example, how supported do you feel by me? Because it's not like, how am I providing clarity to you? It's about providing support also. And sometimes we just get feedback, well, I feel you are pushing, because when it comes to our refinement, you are just pushing us tests to deliver. We ask about the problems, you don't say anything. And then there is something to learn. So I try to increase collaboration by using feedback as an instrument. I provide feedback. I ask them to also collect feedback from people they work with. And this helps us understand how we are seen and what do our actions cause to the others. And then we know where to act.
Yeah, that's a great point. Asking for feedback should be one of those things that we have kind of in the checklist, right? Like as Scrum Masters, we have to help the product owners be comfortable with getting feedback, but of course also help them to learn how to get feedback. And it's not necessarily easy, right? As you said, if we ask something like, did you get enough acceptance criteria from me? Well, that's a yes no question. That's not a very constructive conversation right there, because there's only two answers possible and one of them is wrong. So
Exactly.
we should ask these open questions that you said, how supported do you feel by me? Or other questions related to interaction, which is, when you face difficulties, how do you think we are able to address and respond to the difficulties that you find, or the questions that you find? Or how connected do you feel to the stakeholders or the users? Because that's also the job of the product owner, right? To bring that connection, to help the team be part of creating the solution, but also understanding the customer's problems and understanding the users.
Exactly. This is a very good point because the company I am, we are on a transition stage because before we were project oriented and then we decided to be product oriented. And some people come from project management and they look at me and said, wow, this role of product manager overwhelms me. It's really a lot to do. I said, it can be if you become a bridge and you try to bridge communication. However, if you empower team and you help them help you, it will become a very funny and attractive role. But it's about helping the others. Like, for example, you shouldn't make all the decisions. You should provide enough information so that the best person in the job will make the decision. And you connect them. Just be a catalyst, not a bridge.
Yeah, be a catalyst. That's also maybe one of the aspect of the skills that you shared early on, right? Like this ability to have empathy, the communication, the decision making, like setting up the environment for communication leading to decision making. That's a very important aspect for product managers, and especially because that overwhelm that you talk about, something that I see very often out there in the field, which is the product managers, they feel they have so many decisions to make that sometimes they lose the ability to make them because of the overwhelm, right? Because they, there's too much. I don't know what to consider. There's too many variables.
It's all about simplifying instead of making it more complex. Because generally, what happens is we can draw into complexity, but the way of combating complexity is not by adding more, it's by removing. So we need to find the distractions and make it easier for us. Simplicity is the way of winning the game.
Can you share an example, a concrete example, maybe a story of what you mean by this, removing complexity and creating more simplicity?
Let's take the prioritization. Prioritization is one of the things that overwhelm people the most. Personally, when I started on a project here, I opened the backlog and then I found 350 user stories. And I was supposed to define what do we start. And then I decided to do something crazy. I said, I'm new to the team, right? So how do I start here? Should I go to these 350 user stories and then decide what is the most important and align with the client? Said that doesn't seem easy. It seems too complex. And my way of simplifying was deleting everything from the backlog and going to the client and asking, we have this product vision. What is the next most important thing you have in your mind? And the client was puzzled. And what we decided to do is think on a high level. What is impeding us to get close to our product vision? And then we started with words and blocks. Said, okay, interesting. Now let's look here. Everything is a bet. Let's put in our metrics, easiness of implementation and expected value, expected outcome. And then we started putting in the metrics together, the ideas we had. And then one stood out. It was super easy to implement and the expected value was high. And I said, what if we start exploring this? And the client said, I really like this. Let's explore. And then said, okay, how can we ensure that we are on the right direction? And then we had the resonance. From that, we derived what were our assumptions and how to validate them. And then we implemented. And you know what? After 1.5 years, nobody cared about the 350 user stories I deleted. Because if you cannot remember what is in the backlog, it is not important. So this is one example of complexity. Because of course I didn't delete them. I just closed all the tickets. If something happened, I could just go and reopen them. But I decided just to talk to the customer and understand their pains and look at where we should go. And in this case, I'm saying the customer defined the product vision because we are an agency collaborating closely to the customer, and we really have the product manager role, but we needed to define the next step, how to get there. And I said, best way to do that is connecting to them, empathizing, understanding their problem, and identifying the next opportunity. And from that we go. And then after we validate the assumptions, we learn and we go again and we go in a flow like this.
Maybe this complexity or removing complexities is part of the decision-making set of skills that you enumerated at the start. But I would like to suggest that maybe this is a different set of skills. Maybe you need to have a fifth skill to add to your list, removing complexity.
Interesting. Yeah. Be simple. So
No, I think I really recognize that story from my past as well. There's been many different products I've been working on where one of the biggest obstacles to decision making was exactly that complexity, too many things to review. Like looking at two things, we can say which one is better, right? Looking at five things, maybe we can say maybe one or two things we could start with, but looking at 300 things, when you're through the fifth or 10th thing on the list, you don't remember the others anymore. It's impossible to use information to make a decision in that context.
exactly, it's simply impossible. And I remember I faced resistance when I did that. Some people in the company suggest me, why don't you use RICE to estimate that, to create a calculation and get a number to that? I said, I need to go through 350 with all the team. That will be incredibly time consuming. And I said, and I don't even know if it's worth talking about it because there are some things here lying in the backlog for 1.5 years. Nobody touched. I think I just don't want to talk about it. I want to understand the customer side. And about complexity is everywhere, everywhere. Sometimes people ask me like, how do you organize your backlog in Jira? Which columns do you use or which tools do you use? I say as simple as possible. And sometimes I don't even use a flow. I just create like sections there with sprints, and I could put, for example, here's the backlog, here are the items to refine, here are the refined, and then I just organize that to see visually because I don't want to create a complex flow, which I need to remember how the tool works, because for me, the tool should not lead our actions. We should use the tool as a way of organizing and not adding complexity. And I find that in the world today, we have so many tools, and it's so easy to be driven by the tools instead of focus on what really matters, which is delivering value.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, that ability to remove complexity is what allows us to find value, right? Because value is what stands out when you remove everything else. And I think that practice you just shared of removing stuff from the backlog and then going back, talking about vision, talking about the biggest gaps to vision, and then prioritizing those, I think that's a very useful tool and approach for our product owners to put in place. All right, so we're getting close to the end, David. What's one resource, podcast, book, or other that you want to point us to so that we can start working with our product owners in developing those skills?
I will give 3 resources here because everyone has a different way of learning. For those who want to learn from the others, I would say Serious Scrum is a good source. You can find writers from all over the world. I am there myself sharing stories, what I learned from my mistakes. A podcast, I would go with the one Product Thinking by Melissa Perry. She has exchanges with big names like Jeff Patton and so on, and it's really hands-on. You can learn a lot from that. And the book, I would go with Marty Kagan, Inspired.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put the link on the show notes to all of those. Make sure that everybody can easily find those. And of course, I'll put the link also to David's previous podcast episode here on the podcast. So go ahead and listen to that. David, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for being with us. Where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
You can find more about me on LinkedIn and Medium. And you'll find all of them by David A.V. Pereira. Just search there. I will be on Medium and LinkedIn. Every week, there's something new there.
And we'll put the link on the show notes. David, it's been a pleasure. So thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thanks a lot, and I hope it's helpful. And if you want to know more about it, just reach me.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.